Welcome to today's webinar, Internal Email Metrics that will dramatically improve success, featuring Polite Mail. My name is Justin Teach, and I will be your moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Michael Desrochers, Managing Partner at Polite Mail Software. Michael is the founder and managing director of Polite Mail Software, a provider of email measurement and analytics software for Microsoft Outlook and Exchange. He has spent 15 years as CEO of a 75-person team of communication professionals prior to founding Polite Mail. Michael, are you there?
Yes, hello.
Hello, Michael. I will be giving you control of the platform. So when you see the dialog box that says yes, you would like to share your screen, please say yes.
There we go.
Perfect. And before I let you take control over, I do want to mention one more time to the audience, if you can, please get your questions in as soon as possible for Michael to address so we can jump right into the question and answer session. All right, Michael, whenever you are ready, please take it away.
All right, thanks, Justin. Welcome. All right, so what I'm going to do today is basically present a pile of data, and hopefully out of that data we're going to be able to pull some insights, and we'll share those with you. And let's get right to it. So the big objective here is, to be smarter about using email and to help reduce that email overload feeling that a lot of employees have, but still use email as the preferred message delivery platform. It's the easiest, most direct route to get a message out there, and we just want to do make sure we're doing a better job of it and make sure that the message is effective when we do send it out. So here's what we're looking at in terms of data. So there's over 150 internal email messages that we're looking at across a broad spectrum. So we've broken kind of customers out into industry segments, kind of following the financial indexes. So we've put companies into those categories, and we've also categorized the sends by distribution list size. So not necessarily company size, but distribution list size. Obviously, there's a correlation. If they do an all-employee send, it's going to be larger, but there's a lot of smaller sends mixed in there. And this represents about 52% of our available, of the data. So with the cloud service, we're extracting, anonymous, aggregated, kind of generalized information that we're kind of rolling up into these benchmark data. And then we've got a large segment of on-premise customers where we don't pull that data. So this is a representative sample, but a pretty large one. And this will give us the ability to pull some good insights because it's all internal communications. And if we break that audience size down, you can see that technology makes up the biggest segment of our customer base, and that makes sense. Technology companies tend to be early adopters of other technology, so that's why that's the biggest. Healthcare, next segment, financial services, insurance companies, consumer products, stores, retail, that type of stuff, and it kind of scales down. So all sorts of different industry categories, and we'll actually break out some of the metrics by industry because you'll see there's some big differences between how different organizations behave, and a lot of that's relative. You'll see a difference between healthcare organizations that have a large percentage of non-desk workers and financial companies that have a very high percentage of desk workers. So we'll see some of that. And then we'll also break this down by distribution size. And again, our highest segment here, biggest population between 1,000 and 5,000 in terms of sends. And then the second highest is between 30 and 50,000. And again, we'll drill down into some of that to show you kind of some of the differences that happen based on distribution volume. All right, so here is basically the benchmark data. So across all of those emails, we're pulling out metrics and creating averages, and then we're also tracking them over time. And so we have, open rate, did they actually open the email, attention rate, and let's see, I think I can, yes, we have a laser pointer, there we go. So open rates and attention rate, and we'll get into more specifics here, but what attention rate is to us is, open rate is they looked at the email, and then attention rate is did they pay any attention to it. So we're subtracting out the ignores. And ignore you could think of as like a bounce. So if you've done any web analytics, someone hits your web page, they immediately leave. Same thing with an email. Like if you preview an email, that's really an open, but if you skip on down to the next one, then that's what we're counting as ignored. Then we're tracking, read timing, and we're using 30% of the content length as the threshold to call someone a reader. So that is our average read rate, engagement rate, some little bit of crazy math formula going on there, but what we're doing to count engagement is we're taking the percent of the message that gets read and we're adding in the click rate, and we're doing a little math to keep it within 100% range. But that's how that works. So engagement is really a combination of reading and clicking, and then of course click rate, and then effective rate, again a little bit of math, but we're changing the divisor. So your click rate here is out of everyone you sent to, and then what we're calling effective rate is for the people that didn't ignore it. So they actually looked at the content, how effective was that message at getting them to click. So it gives you a little bit, of course, if they don't, if they ignore the message, you're not going to get any clicks anyway. So we're trying to get down to how effective was the content at driving the click. So that math applies to all the metrics that we're presenting today. And, we'll drill down a little bit more detail. So the first topic is like, why are we measuring at all, right? Why do we want to know, what's happening more than just the fact that, I sent a message and people got it? And the key with measurement, I think it's, I like Peter Drucker's quote, what gets measured gets managed. So if you don't know what's happening, you really don't have a lot of levers to pull in terms of changing things to get the behavior that you want. So that's why we're going to put some numbers here. But another key reason to measure is if we look at the top row, right, 150 million messages, 123,000 minutes, average message size, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes in length. We're talking about a lot of time, right? It takes time to put these messages together. It takes even more time if you're sending to a large audience for those people to process the email, decide if they're going to read it, not read it, then actually read it. So there's a lot of time involved in putting together the communications, processing, reading the communications. So time is money, and what we want to do is optimize that. We don't want to waste people's time. So you can do a simple calculation. If we can save 10 minutes, sorry for my bouncing cursor there, but if we can save 10 minutes of people's time per week, and let's say, generally 48 working weeks per year, assuming you get some vacation in there. So there's 8 hours a year, which doesn't seem like a whole lot, but if you have a 5,000 person company, and we'll take a conservative rate, $30 an hour, now we're over $1 million in time savings just by not, wasting people's time with email that they don't need, or sending too much content, or all those things that happen, and you have an inbox, what happens. So we're just trying to use data to inform that and help you improve those broadcast communications so that your company can operate at the highest efficiency. All right, so back to the numbers. Again, these are the benchmarks. So, you can compare your open rate against, our average open rate. So in general, 71% of the people you send to will look at the email, but really, 60%, just under, will pay attention to it. And we can break this down by industry, where you'll see some changes. So you can click on these items down here, the chart. So if I look at technology, you'll see a slight change. We've got slightly lower open rate, slightly lower click rate. If we go and look at healthcare, we see an even lower open rate, which again logically makes sense. There's a lot more nurses running around, not necessarily in front of a computer. Slightly higher click rate than on the technology side. And then let's take a look at financial services. And now what we'll see, really high open rates on average, really high click rates. So again, more desk workers, higher consumption of the digital messaging. So, like a car, your mileage may vary. The benchmarks give you some averages across all the industries. We can drill down to a specific industry, and you can kind of see where things fall relative to your own organization. But your company, is going to be different in itself. So, but it's always nice to know. That's why, executives compare their financials against industry financials just to see, how are we doing relative to our peers. Same concept applies here. All right, we can do the same thing by distribution size. So, even though many of our clients work for large organizations, there are users that are talking to a very specific organization or business unit. So, the all-employee list might be 50,000, but your group that you talk to might be, 4,000 or something. So, different behavior based on different list size. So, if we take a look just at the metrics for the 1,000 to 5,000 size, you can see, slight changes, pretty much on average though, just slightly below there, just slightly above here. And then if we take a look at the larger size, the 30 to 50,000 range, quite significant drop in open rate and even more significant drop in click rate. And we'll take a look. Again, there'll be some more detail by distribution list size later on. All right, so what can we learn from this? So given this data, we'd like to have some insights. And again, we were kind of just talking at the top level, but I thought it would make sense to put the conclusion right up here at the top, and then we'll drill down into the specifics to figure out how we got to that conclusion. So even if you're not measuring email, if you want your messages, your email communications to be more effective, then based on the benchmark data that we've analyzed, you should send less content, send more often, use pictures, send in the morning and on a routine schedule, and you'll have a better response of your email. So if you do nothing more, you can follow that advice. And what I'm going to do for the rest of this presentation is just drill down into the details, and we'll figure out how we got to this particular kind of best practice advice. All right. So here's the opens, and what we're going to do is break the opens, the reading, and the clicks down further and kind of into its component pieces and analyze it in different ways. And so this will be the start of that. So again, open rates here, opens and ignores, and it's probably worth pausing for a moment just to talk about what an open actually is. An open by itself, it's always the thing that, particularly if customers, if they've never measured email, or if they're using some other tool, that they always want to know how many people open the email. But personally, opens aren't particularly valuable. I open a lot of email and I never really look at it, right? If an email comes up in my preview pane, technically it's opened, and really what you want to know is, did they pay attention to it? Did they actually read it? That's the key, most important metric. Not so much in open. In opens really just, did they receive the email? But there's some nuances to opens as well. And the key thing is to measure opens. The way it's done is through what's called the beacon image. Same way web pages essentially track, similar as but email is tracked through an image reference that gets requested from a server, and that server request, when that happens, it's saying, hey, that image got requested, we know that email was looked at, so it's an open. But we all get email from our inboxes from various companies marketing to us, although now with clutter filter in Outlook 2016, I get a lot less of those. but still some make it through, and I get this click to download pictures. So with external communications, email marketing type messages, they get that click to download pictures, and if you don't click it, there's never an open. And a lot of times those emails, you can still read it, you can still get the gist of it without downloading the pictures. And so that's really the key factor. So for a lot of email marketing tools, if you're in the high 20 open rate, that's considered a good open rate. And it's really, you're just missing out on a large population of the data because the pictures aren't being automatically downloaded. So the tool you use matters in terms of what quality of data you're getting. If those pictures don't download, then no data, you don't really know. Math matters too, and I know math is a favorite subject of most communicators, so you'll be right at home here. But a little bit of math is important. You need to understand, how these metrics are being calculated, particularly if you are presenting data to an executive. Executives spend a lot of time with numbers, and they know how to pick them apart and can kind of detect. They have good bullshit detectors when it comes to numbers. So you need to know what the numbers are, what they mean, how they are mathematically put together. And so an open rate can be calculated in a whole bunch of different ways, and they mean different things. But the two most common mistakes that we'll see is if you don't take out the undeliverables, your open rates are going to be understated. And why would you have undeliverables for an internal email? And surprisingly, most lists, they're just not that accurate. In any organization, large organization, there's a lot of turnover. Those lists are going to take some time to keep updated. Some companies are better at keeping those updated than others, of course. And so there's going to be addresses that are just not going to get delivered. And if you don't take those out, you're suppressing your open rate. So if you have a list of 5,000 and 3,200 people open, and we're tracking people as individuals in this case, you've got a 64% open rate. But let's say that 600 of those bounce, which is not completely unusual for a list that size. Your actual open rate, so here you're below average, right? Because you didn't subtract out the undeliverables, you didn't track them, you suppress them, whatever it happens to be. So now your actual open rate is 73%, you're above average. But your math shows you to be below average, so sad face, happy face, all based on the math. Can you count those, and are they getting subtracted out of the formula that you use? And then another thing that happens is the opposite direction, is opens can easily be exaggerated. So again, here I sent to a list of 5,000 people, I get 3,900 opens, but in this case, opens are being counted as unique devices. So we're not counting people, I shouldn't say we, but some tools, they don't count people, they count devices. And usually it's unique devices, but devices basically are browsers. So a Windows phone might pretend to be an iPhone, an IE browser might pretend to be a Chrome browser. They do technological things to make, to get compatibility. And so you can't always count them as exactly as you'd like, but let's say you can. So unique devices, right? So we're going to use that. So these opens are by device. So you get 39,000, you end up with a 78% open rate, like really good open rate. However, we know 22% of people are going to open the same message on multiple devices, right? So I'm going to see it on my iPhone, view it real quick, that's an open, then I'm going to go actually read it on my desktop, that's another open. Those are different devices, those will get counted separately, so your open rate's getting exaggerated in that case. And so really, your open rate is lower, it's 61%. So the math matters, you got to know how your numbers are being calculated for them to make sense. All right, so let's get back to the actual open details. So up at the top here, we've got our benchmark average across all our data set here, 71% open rate and a 10% ignore rate. And again, the difference here is an open is at least a preview. They looked at the message. They don't have to double click it to open it. It just, if they see the content, it's opened. And an ignore rate, what we're doing there is we're counting at ignore as if they viewed the message for less than 3 seconds and the message was more than 10 seconds long, then we're going to say they ignored it. If it's a really short message, a couple of sentences, then we're not going to count it the same way, because you can read a couple sentences really quickly. But generally, if it's under 3 seconds, I can, if I preview the message, glance at it, and then move on, that's an under 3 second view. That's going to be considered an ignore. So what we're doing is looking at both of those, and then we're going to break these down. So we're going to look at by sender type. So what influences whether someone opens an email, right? It's going to be who's it from, what's it about, and what time did I get it, right? So those kind of 3 things are going to determine whether someone looks at your message or not. So we broke that down by, a mailbox, yourself. So this is, sending as your name. This is sending as another person, so a name that's not yourself, and this is a a shared mailbox, HR at or benefits at type of newsletter at type of address. So slight difference, but you can see there's a slightly higher open rate if it's sent from a person that's not yourself, and usually in that case, you're sending as an executive, so that makes a little sense, but not a huge difference. There we can see some changes, as you send to larger and larger lists, there's a slight deduction. You can see a downward trend in open rates as you send to bigger lists, and it's even more obvious on the ignore. So you can see that gray line getting longer, deeper as the bigger lists you send to. So the less targeted your distributions, the less opens and the more ignores you can expect. And then let's look at time of day. And here, everyone wants to know what's the best time to send the email. And, the conclusion here is, if you send it during the day, it's going to work pretty good. Not a lot of change. So there's no magic bullet really with that. So we're breaking time into day parts. So, before work, morning, afternoon, evening after work, and then after hours. So we break those out and then categorize the data into those buckets. Open rates by subject line is interesting. So again, like, if you are sending email, and I think there's some, we have some anecdotal evidence about subject lines, and you're always better to use a subject line which is informative versus a subject line that would be, say, the name of the newsletter. June's newsletter isn't so good as 450 people attended the volunteer thing this weekend. Something that has a news snippet in there is going to get usually 10 to 15% higher open rates than just a static subject line. So you should really use from addresses for those static identifiers and content in the subject line as a best practice. And then this is just really looking at how many words are in the subject line. Is there a differential in how people open it? And if you do keep your subject lines short, slightly higher open rates, but really you can go out to 9 or 10, 11 words, and you're basically in the same ballpark here. So you can have very descriptive subject lines, and you're not suffering anything but like just over a point differential. So that's good. And then here's an interesting trend, right? So we're looking at opens that occur on mobile devices and opens that occur on desktop devices. This is data from 2015 to 2017. You can see definitely a downward trend in desktop opens. The percent of opens that are coming from a desktop versus percent of opens that are coming from a mobile. So if there's any question about the ongoing growth of mobile access to email, there should be none, which opens up opportunities in terms of you really need to think about responsive design. You really need to think about making your intranet accessible through mobile. So there's things that need to accommodate what's going on in the device land. All right, so let's just drill down a little bit here. Rates by number of recipients. This is just to help you a little bit see the downward trend. As you get bigger, lower opens, higher ignore rate, just what we talked about. And here we're going to do some timing data. So we're going to look at when you send the email, what your rates are. So and there's quite a few sends you can see in the morning commute. So before work, highest number. This gray line showing you relative volume. So not a lot of people sending in the evening or after hours. It's a good thing. Most of it's happening morning to afternoon, and you can see that's where you're getting your rates. And sometimes people ask, why would you send it before work? But really what you're trying to do is some time zone stabilization. So you're trying to get that email to people in the morning, so you might send it East Coast time before work, and then everyone's going to get it in their inbox in the morning. So that's this piece of data. But then if we look at when people actually open the email, so this is rates by when you send it, and this data here is when they actually open it. And you can see there's a slight preference. Morning is better than afternoon, way better than evening, and a lot of us are checking email before we head into work, obviously. So some data there. Day of the week, same general thing, not a huge difference. You can see a slight preference. And again, this gray line is showing you volume, so not a lot of email going out over the weekend, but for people that look at their email on the weekend, same open rates and ignore rates, even maybe slightly less ignore rates than during the week. So again, we're working too much. Can draw from there, but again, I like to keep up with my email too, so it makes sense. Nothing worse than an overflowing inbox. All right. And then here we're going to do the same thing, day of the week. And this was interesting because it kind of stair steps up to Thursday, drops off on Friday. So your open rates do increase up to Thursday for whatever reason. And again, this may change and based on industry or what have you, but generally Thursday seems to be slightly better than Wednesday, which is slightly better than Tuesday, which is definitely better than Monday. So for what it's worth, I wouldn't necessarily recommend changing your schedules to send only on Thursdays, but there's some, definitely some information there. So here we're back to that main open page, and then we're going to drill down further into this words by subject line, but I'm going to break it down here by industry to see if we can notice any changes. So up in the upper left, this is our benchmark average up here. So short subject lines tend to work best, almost equivalent to 9 to 11 words. In the technology industry, even up to 5 or 6 words, pretty steady, slight drop off, 7, 8, 9 to 10, 9 to 11, we're back up in that same range. Again, very slight differences. With financials, more significant benefit, and you can see most of the emails that are being sent have short subject lines. So this is a volume line, and then this is the rates, what's happening with those. So highest when they're short, but really even for the really long subject lines, you do see a market increase in ignores. So you're seeing a 6% differential in ignore rate when you send a really long subject line, but your open rate is still high 80s, so 7% there. So definitely financial skewed towards short subject lines, but in healthcare we're seeing a difference. So short subject lines lower actually than having a descriptive subject line, 7 or 8 words. Here you're actually getting higher rates than the real short ones. So again, by industry, by size, things change a little bit. All right, now what we're going to do with this slide is let's analyze what the best performers and the worst performers are doing, and what's the difference between someone that consistently high attention rates versus consistently low attention rates. And again, attention rate is really just opens minus ignores. So we're taking that as attention. So the best performers, the highest quintile, and a quintile, everyone's familiar with the 20% rule, right? Your 20% of your results, or 100%, 80% of your results come from 20% of your effort, type of thing. So we're taking that same concept. We're breaking the data up into groups of 20, even-sized buckets. So we'll put the same amount of email in each bucket, and then we'll take the best performing one, and we'll say, those are our best performers. So we're gonna rate them all, put them all in a line based on attention rate, and then we're gonna put them into buckets so that they're even amounts in each, and then the highest group will be here, lowest group will be here, and you can see quite a difference between those. So over 50% differential. So maybe we can figure out why, and you can see that same thing here. It's like almost 100% increase in ignores if you're in the lower quintile versus the upper quintile. So the dark color is the strong players, the light color is the weak players, and you can see the difference. So generally, the stronger performers send from a person versus a mailbox. The majority of messages are still going from a mailbox, but you see there's a slight, there is a differential there. In terms of words in the subject line, higher performers are sending, the key here, 5 to 6 words in the subject line, versus the lower performers are sending, 9 to 11 words generally. So there's a differential there. When are they sending? You can kind of see that the high performers are sending in the morning versus the afternoon, and the lower end performers are doing more late sends for whatever reason. And then volumes, or this is day of the week. Again, you can see a preference. The strong performers are sending earlier in the week. The weaker performers are sending later in the week. So just some, looking at the differential, there's some things that we can learn there. All right, now we're going to look at the read information, and what we're doing when we're measuring reads is really just timing how long they're viewing the message. And then there's 2 read metrics. There's the read rate, and so this is, we're using a 30% threshold. So if you send a minute, 20 seconds worth of email, if someone reads 40 seconds of it, 30% of that minute, 20 seconds. Am I doing my math right? No, I'm not. It's 60 seconds. I'm trying to get something easily divisible. So yeah, we'll do it a minute. so a minute email, if someone reads 20 seconds, we're calling them a reader. And then if they read over 30 seconds, we're calling them an engaged reader. And then we'll keep tracking it up to 150% of the time. So once they hit 150%, we're going to call that a left open. So if you leave your email up in Outlook and walk away, or someone comes in and talks to you, it'll only be timed up to that 150% maximum, so you don't throw the numbers way off. So that's read rate is at least 30%. We're calling them a reader, and the percent read is how much of the content did they read. So if you sent an email, most on average people will read 78% of the content. So we break those reads down based on timing. So we have ignores, less than 3 seconds. A skim is under 30%, and a read is over 30%. And then if they were above this 50%, this section here we would call an engaged reader, and then there would be a left open category. So that's how that timing breaks down. Reading by number of recipients, not any real clear trends here. So kind of all over the board, slightly less readership as you get really large emails, but it just kind of bounces around. Here, you can kind of see one trend I like is we're getting higher readership over the years. So as customers are using the metrics and making changes, they're able to improve their readership over time. this is some interesting data on reading down at the bottom, and I think we'll drill down into this a little bit more. But what we're looking at here is what's the content composed of? So is it all text, mostly text, so it might have a banner at the top and then the rest of it's text. More text than image, so there's a few images, but it's still majority of it is text. An even balance, so you have roughly the same amount of pixel space between images and text, and then mostly images. And I think it's pretty obvious what the trend here is, but let's drill down. My mouse won't let me go down. All right, I'll use my finger. There we go. All right, so we can zoom in on this, and you can see, if you're sending a text email, it's going to do better than if you just have a banner at the top and then text. So, text emails work, up to probably a certain size, but they're still effective. But once you start, doing a nice layout with some images in there, you can see that the readership, goes up. So this is percent read, and this is your read rate. So this is how much of the content did they read, and then this is what percentage of people actually read. So if you use a lot of images in your email, you get higher readership. That's the bottom line there. And then we're going to break this out by industry and see if there's any differentials. So again, here in technology, text emails work just as good as mostly images, and then it kind of falls off. So if you're in a tech company and you want to get someone to pay attention to the email, just send a regular email or send a nicely designed, high image email, but the stuff in the middle, not so good. In financial services, kind of follows the trend here. The all text, better than a few images, but when you're balanced, you have an even balance of text and images, or you're image heavy, they work better. In healthcare, again, we're seeing different results. So we're getting mostly text, so those banner type emails tend to work pretty well in healthcare versus, an even balance is probably the worst that you could do in that environment. So there you go. Your results vary based on industry by quite a bit. All right, and then we'll look at readership by time of day sent, and then time of week sent. So again, not a lot. So if you're sending the message early, higher readership than later in the day, and again, earlier in the week tends to be stronger than later in the week. And if we look at readership by reading ease, so reading ease is the Fleisch scale. So easy, simple language is the easiest. Difficult language, lots of jargon, internal words. So both those extremes tend to give you the best numbers. Generally, you'll see the simpler the language, the better. And that reading ease scale is a tool that's available inside of Word. So if you put your message content in Word, and then somewhere under options, there's a way you can get that reading ease scale if you're curious where yours show up. This is just a range. This kind of shows you the range content size. So most people are sending short emails, but there's a few people that are sending emails that would take 40 minutes, an hour to read. A few of those have multi-languages embedded in the same message, so that extends it out a little bit. But there's a lot of people sending too much content, but fortunately the majority of email is relatively short. This is about the 10-minute cutoff here, still quite a bit of content. And here in this chart, you can see what happens when you send a lot of content. So we're breaking down our readership metrics based on the length of the email. So here's the length of the email. How long would it take me to read this content? And you can see the obvious trend, right? You're going to get 92% of the email read if it's under 30 seconds. 30 seconds is roughly 100 words. a minute, 200 words, and you can see it drops right off. So you're a minute, and then it slowly kind of scales down. Really, drops off after 4 minutes, takes another, decent-sized dip, and then slowly scales down again at that point. So if you can keep your content under 4 minutes and ideally under 1 minute, you're going to have much higher readership. Obviously, not all content is going to fit under 1 minute, but just so you know what content length does to readership, this is the data that tells you, intuitively. You probably know that from your own experience, but you're still being asked to send out really long emails, and here's the reason why you might not want to. And readership by sender type. So again, if you're sending from a shared mailbox, from yourself, or from a person that's not yourself, the person that's not yourself, generally an executive, tends to have higher readership. For whatever reason, the self is lower than the shared mailbox. I don't necessarily know why that is, but that's the data. All right, and now we're going to do the same thing we did before. So we're going to compare best to worst. So what are the best performers doing in terms of readership versus the worst performers? And what we're measuring here is that engagement rate metric. So engagement rate combines readership with click rate. So generally with email communications, you're trying to get people to do one of two things. They either need to read it, you're informing them, you're educating them, or you're asking them to do something. They need to take some action. So those are the activities, and we'll count both of those in the engagement metric. So the top performers are hitting that 100% engagement number, and the lower performers are only in the 39% range. For readership, again, big difference, almost double the readership for the top performers, and again, double the engagement rates as well. And here's, I think, the big reason is you can see in terms of readership, the dark color is the top performers, light color is the low performers, shorter emails, right? So the top performers are sending shorter messages, getting better results. Day of week, the top performers are sending earlier in the week, lower performers sending later in the week. Like, they're sending a lot on Friday, top performers sending a lot on Tuesday. And again, for reading ease, kind of an interesting chart here. So, top performers are generally sending what would be considered hard to read content or easy to read content, but the low performers are actually doing the opposite, right? They're sending mid-range content, not particularly hard, not particularly easy, and we see a vast difference in results. All right, now we're going to look at the click rate. So on average, if you send an email with something to click on, 13% of people will click on it. Not great, but those those numbers vary, and I think we'll see what we can do to increase our click rates here. So is there a change in click rates based on volume? And I would say yes. There's a general trend. We have that outlier here at this size, but when you're sending to more higher population, you're generally seeing lower click rates. So if you're sending under 1,000 people, you're at 14%, under 5,000, just under 14%, but when you're sending to 50 or 100,000, you're at 4%. So there you make sense there. By person, what type, the higher click rate, the people may not be reading it if you send from yourself, or slightly lower, but they're clicking slightly more. And again, this pretty consistent data, but definitely different. You get higher readership when you're sending by a person, and lower click rates for whatever reason that is. This is just a histogram of the number of links being sent in the email, and again, there's a few outliers of people sending a whole lot of content, but most people are sending just a few links. And if we break that down further, so this is doing that quintile segments by number of links in a message. So if you're sending one link, you get your highest click rate. So the average is 13%. If you send an email with one link, you're going to be up in the 26% range. So if you really want someone to do something, send them one link. And then it drops down kind of the average. You're sending multiple links and kind of scales down. The more things you give them to do, the less they're going to do. And here you see that broken down by number of links. So if you're sending one link, 2 links, 3 links, and it kind of scales down. It levels off. So once you're sending more than 4 links, your click rate's just in there. But fewer number of links, more likely people are to click on them. And then again, this is back to that content measurement. So we have some timing data here, but what I wanted to point out here was this click rate by message size. So the longer your content, the lower your click rate generally is going to be. So if you send those short messages with very few links, you're going to get a lot of action. And if not, the numbers are just lower. And then different, you see the same general trend. We have a declining number of clicks happening on desktop and an increasing number of clicks happening on mobile, which means your IT team really needs to get that intranet site accessible, secure those mobile devices and have them be able to get to that internal content that people are going to be linking to. And there's a variety of different ways to do that. Not our business, but there's a lot of companies that do that. Time of day sent, again, this is really just indicating, when you get messages out first thing in the morning, you get higher click rates than if you send them later in the day. And we can actually break that down to when people are actually clicking. But before we get to that, so this is breaking down that click rate by minutes sent, and I'm going to break it down by industry. So here's our average. This is the kind of the general benchmark data across all companies, and then we're going to look at for technology companies. It's not quite so drastic, right? You still get higher click rates if you're sending shorter messages, and that tails off. But if you are sending longer messages, you're still getting fairly high click rates in some cases. In financial services, very much follows the average. So short messages, under a minute, stronger click rates. Over that, very low click rates. In healthcare, not quite so drastic. You can send a couple minutes of content before you see significant fall off, and then it kind of bounces around, but still not as low as what you're seeing in financial services. So definitely variations by industry. And same thing here. Now this is where we're going to look at by the number of links sent in the email. So here's our average, what people get in technology, not so much. So our average number is up here, but technology is pretty consistent. So you can pretty much send any number of links and you're going to be in the ballpark. Obviously you're up above 10 for less links, down in the 8, 7 range for more links, but not a drastic change. Financials above the averages. So the averages are down here. Pattern is the same, but much higher click-through. So if you're sending just a few links in those emails in financial services, much higher click rates than sending a lot of content. In healthcare, it's more similar to technology in terms of the pattern. There's a slight skew towards less links, but it's pretty consistent, very slight variation across the board, so 12% range versus 9% range. And now time of day for click. So this is, when you send it, again, if you're trying to get to people in the morning and you're sending across time zones, you're going to be sending it generally, before work, and then you'll get the highest click rate for that message because people have it in their inbox in the morning, and that's what we're seeing here is when people click, the majority is happening in the morning. Same thing that we saw with the openings and the reads, and when you send earlier in the week, you tend to get better click performance than later in the week, but when people are actually clicking, again, for some odd reason, Thursday seems to be the day that, you can get an 18% versus 23%, so 5% improvement on clicks for Thursdays. So that follows the other data as well. And now we're going to do that same quintile comparison. So top performers, worst performers, and again, vast difference in ability to get people to take action. So nearly a 50% click rate in those top performers versus a 2% click rate in the bottom performers. So pretty massive difference. And this is effective rate. So this is the actual click rate, so 37%. Effective rate, remember, is we're backing out the ignores. So we're changing the divisor because obviously if you ignored it, they're never going to click it. So this is content effectiveness at getting people to click. And this is the actual click rate. And here, if we look at the data, dark is good, light is bad, and preference for mornings in the good category, preference for difficult or easy to read content, and again we see that same behavior. You're putting that medium range, not easy, not hard to read content, and that's the majority of the messages, whereas the top performers are sending very detailed, acronym, company specific type messages, are very easy to read messages. The big difference again with clicks is the top performers are sending shorter messages. Like, they're keeping messages under that 4-minute range. So you can see that change in behavior gets them the variation in results. And again, a preference in the top performers to send earlier in the week versus a preference in the bottom performers to send later in the week. So those same behavior patterns coming up. So let's click here. So now we're going to look at some cadence data, which is what we're trying to get to here is how often should you send, or does frequency impact your rates? And the way we're looking at this is it has to be the same from address to the same list, and then we're counting how many times those messages get sent over a quarter period. And so we've broken that down. So if you send less than a quarter, more than one per quarter, more than one per month, more than one, one or more per week, one per day, more than one per day. And so this is the volume. So most people are sending one or more per month. Next is one or more per week. And that's where the majority of the email messages are falling. And then this is what we're getting for metrics following those same volumes. And so when you send rarely, you're going to get your highest open, your highest read, but not your highest click, which is interesting in itself. So there's a novelty factor, right? If I don't get an email often from a particular address, it's new, I might recognize it as coming from my company, so I'm going to take a look at it. I don't see it all the time, so I haven't been trained to ignore it. I want to pay attention to it. So that jumps right out here, and then we drop down into a range. And so generally, one a month, one or more a month, one or more a week, you're in a good range. It drops off by over 5% if you're sending every day, but if you're sending more than every day, it bumps up. So despite what your intuition might say, better open performance, sending more than once per day to the same list from the same person. Again, in terms of readership, rarely sent in emails, less than one a quarter, they get looked at, they get read, and then we're down into a fairly consistent range whether you're sending by the month, by the week, by the day. So no big change. On the click rates, we see slightly different, so not a lot on those occasional emails, but the most, the highest click rate at the once per day. So even though less people are opening, the people that are opening are more apt to click. And then again, more than once per day, you're right here at that average click rate overall. And this is more than once per day. This is pretty much your average readership and just above average readership. So those high volume senders actually perform pretty well. So people are used to hearing from you. It can work. All right, so what can we do with this data? We had those kind of the conclusion we put up front, which is based on this data. You want to send less content, so send shorter emails, send more frequently. You want to use images. You want to send, in the morning, and if you can stick to a regular schedule, that just gets people in the practice of anticipating messages working you into their day, so it's not an interruption. So that gives us some best practices we can glean from the data. But the other thing that we can do with data is have the computer learn things. So what's great about Netflix is I watch a few movies and then it starts suggesting things that I might like. I pick a few things out on Amazon and all of a sudden it's suggesting other things that people that bought the stuff I'm buying also bought. And that's machine learning. It's keeping track of the data and then making recommendations. And so what we're working towards is keeping track of this data so that we can train one of those machine learning algorithms or models. And then as you're composing the email, it should be able to give you advice, right? If you put this subject line in there, you should anticipate a lower open rate based on all the data we've collected about other sends that you've done. And if you have this balance of content in your email, you should expect a lower or higher email read rate. So as you change your content, the AI machine should be able to give you feedback about what's going to happen with that message as you're putting together. So that's kind of where we're trying to take this stuff. I mean, obviously you can use the data right now, make some changes, see what happens, make improvements to what you're doing, and then people are very good pattern recognition machines, but machines are even better at taking large amounts of data and extracting those patterns and then being able to make recommendations based on that. All right, so I will end it here and open up for questions, and I hope that kind of deep dive analysis into the email data was useful and beneficial, and if people have specific questions, I'm happy to address them.
Thank you, Michael, for spending the afternoon with us. That was a very, very thorough presentation, and I know I learned a lot. And based off of the amazing questions that we had come through from our audience, I think you can shed some light on a lot of stuff. So just jumping right in, with the attention, read, and engagement rate, are there any electronic measurements for how far in a message someone reads?
The percent read will give you that. So you're taking what we call a time to read. So generally, roughly you could estimate it as 200 words a minute, 250 words a minute, somewhere in there. And so if you send out a 4-minute email, about 800 words, we're gonna time that, and then if they read 2 minutes of it, we're going to say that was 50% of it was read. We won't really know if they read the top or the bottom or skipped around, but we will generally know how much time they spent inside of that email page versus how much time it would take someone to read everything.
Okay, perfect. This is an unrelated question, but at the very beginning of the presentation, what software were you using to display the various data groups?
So that is Microsoft's Power BI. So we're using Power BI is like a Tableau. They're in that data visualization. So we're taking polite mail data and piping it into Power BI and then doing a whole ton of work to get those charts and graphs organized in there.
Okay, thank you. Why does the notification show up, click here to download a picture? Sometimes it also shows up in a mobile as well.
Right, so generally it's a security setting. So it used to be that content just downloaded automatically, and I'm kind of aging myself a little bit here, but so if you sent an email out, someone looked at it, the content would automatically display. But the downside of that is the people that would just make up random email addresses, send them out, they would get an open, then they would know, oh, this is a real email address, now I can start spamming it. So the email providers switched and said, oh, we're not going to allow that to happen. We're going to block images by default, and you have to put them on your safe senders list or add them as a contact before we're going to allow that content to come through, because we don't really want them to know, whether this is a real email address or not. So that was the default behavior. That's how Outlook works. That's how Android works. The iPhone default mail app and Gmail recently changed their behavior because they realized it has advertising impacts, and Gmail wants all that revenue they can get because they don't have enough apparently. But so for sending people to Gmail or people viewing on their iPhone, there isn't going to be the click to download pictures. And actually there is a caveat with iPhones. So that's true up to 250 KB of images. And if you send more than 250 KB of images in an email, then the iPhone's going to go, I'm not going to download all that right now. I'll make the user click to get the rest of those pictures. So it'll display some of them up to that 250, but not all of them. But for Outlook, if you're sending internally, Outlook's smart enough to say, well, if this is an email from inside my company, I'm going to download the content because I'm going to trust it. But if it's coming from outside the company, it's probably a marketing message, and I'm not going to trust it, and I'm not going to display those pictures automatically. So that's why it happens sometimes and not other times. It's really, based on the tool and based on where that email is coming from. That's going to determine the image blocking behavior.
All right, and that actually makes sense. All right, Michael, at what point in a company's growth do you recommend measuring internal email? For example, a 150-person company, is that too small?
Yeah, I mean, we do it, and we're smaller than that. But we eat our own dog food, I guess you can say. But we have had quite a bit of interest in companies once they hit the over 500, over 1,000. I think then things start getting a little out of control, both from a list management standpoint as well as a content standpoint. So once you have a sizable group, and you can't put your hands on everyone or know what people are doing, then I think then it becomes more important to know what's happening with those messages.
All right. This person wants to know where the industry data is derived from.
So that industry data is basically so a lot of our customers are public companies, and so we take their symbol and then we match that to a financial index. And so if they're in a technology financial index, then we put them in the technology category. Some companies are in more than one. So in those cases, the way we classify them is there's the primary and the secondary industry category. For the non-public companies, we just make basically a judgment call based on our knowledge of the customer or some other information. Some of them it's pretty obvious. A bank is financial. A retail company is consumer. But some of them, particularly in the manufacturing, is this energy? Is this materials? Some of them are a little hard to tell. But that's for the majority of them. We're mapping public industry index information. So we're trying to map to the index categories.
Okay, perfect.
So like a sector
Michael,
fund. Yeah, I'm sorry. It was just if there's a if your company is in a sector fund and that sector is consumer discretionary, then we would put that into our consumer category.
okay. Michael, do you have any recommendations on how to increase readership for a global newsletter that this person sends on a biweekly basis? To give a little background and context, they say that their readership numbers are decreasing, so they're just looking for some suggestions.
Right. So readership, again, I don't know if they're talking readership the way Polite Mail measures it, or readership just in terms of open rates. But generally, like anything, a lot of it's going to be dependent on the content.
They clarified with open rates.
Okay, so open rates, again, it's a hard thing. You got to go back to the math. It's possible that there's the list quality has declined, and that's going to have an impact. It's possible that you're not, you're using a subject line that's a little staid, like, I don't know, week, I guess it's bi-weekly, so, week 1, week 4, whatever that might be. So, or there might be too much content, or the content's just not relevant to the specific audience. So generally what we see with newsletters is it helps to reduce the volume of content, increase the use of images, and then segment the list and distribute your content based on their interests. So you might have a global news story that gets applied everywhere, but maybe you have for each region, so you have a North America version and an EU version and an Asia version, where you're putting issues or news stories that's more relevant to them higher up in the email, versus making them all the same. Because one thing that happens, particularly with newsletters, is if the content isn't relevant to a large part of the audience, and if they receive, say, 3 or 4 in a row that there's nothing of interest, then they just start tuning out, and that's why you'll see that slow drop in open rates. That's one reason. So you can change the format, you can change the subject lines, you can more finely target your audience. Those are all ways to improve the readership.
All right. Michael, our next question is from one of our audience members that she said that her organization went from 100% ad hoc delivery of corporate comms to a weekly digest, which now can include 15 to 20 messages per week. She wants to know, how does she convince leadership going back to a more frequent cadence with fewer chunks of content is more effective?
Well, I mean, I guess you could use the data. So there'll be a PDF. You can use some of the data here and show, in general, this is the behavior that you can expect. That has some value. I know you could, some organizations, you could do a quick survey, just a preference survey. It would be great if you had the data, the before-after data, kind of the A/B test data. Would be the best case scenario, right? So if you knew what the kind of metrics were when you were doing the ad hoc, and then you knew what the metrics were when you did the kind of that digest version, then you'd have clear evidence, right? This works better than that. And there, we do have a case study on our website because one of our clients at Microsoft actually took that same approach, and that would actually be a pretty valuable case study to look at because that's what they did. They basically took a bunch of smaller messages, compiled them up into this, it might have been monthly versus weekly digest, but they compiled them up into a digest email and then sent them out, and their numbers, fell through the floor, and they were like, wait a minute, we thought this was a great idea. We were going to send less email. That was supposed to be better. And what they found out was, people didn't want the long content. They didn't know where to look. It was, there was too much scanning, too much to go through to get those few tidbits that they needed. So they switched to, what they called, at that time, this popcorn method. So they would take and send out, sometimes daily emails of just one story, one piece of content with an image, and they got much higher response rates, up to, I think they got to 100% engagement rate by changing from the digest method to the popcorn method. So take a look at that. You can download that from the site, and that might be, when a company like Microsoft has already gone through the pain and was willing to tell you their experience, that tends to hold a lot of weight, and then you can use our data here as kind of backup to say, those longer emails just don't work as well. And here's two pieces, here's two data points for why they don't.
All right. And finally, does it affect open rates if an email was sent much earlier in the day? So for instance, if an email was sent at 8 a.m. versus 6 a.m., which one would more likely be read?
Yeah, so that's a little hard to answer. I think basically you want to be in the inbox, and it kind of depends on where you're sending. So if you're in the East Coast and all your employees are in the East Coast, then 8 a.m. would be better because you're be closer to the top of the inbox. But if you're sending across the country in all these different time zones, then you kind of got to pick somewhere, and some of those people aren't going to see it until your 11 a.m. your time because they're out on the West Coast, and there's not a lot you can do about it until we release our next version where we do have time zone sending. So it you say 9 o'clock and it translates it into 9 o'clock the recipient's time instead of your time, which then you can kind of fine-tune when you want to get the message in. But between 6 and 8, it's hard to say. I would generally say the closer to the time that they start work, the better, because then you're closer to the top of the inbox.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Michael, for spending the afternoon with us. I know this was very beneficial. Do you have any final sentiments before we end for the day?
No, just a little bit. I mean, this data is available as a PDF. It's going to be updated. The next thing we're going to be doing with that, I know we have some customers on the line, and what we're working on is providing to build this in to the product so that you could basically connect your data, your polite mail data, to the benchmark data, and then do a comparative result so you can see where you are versus the benchmark, and then slice that by industry or list size. So for those customers that are in attendance sometime before the end of the year, we anticipate having that available.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Thank you once again, Michael, for spending the afternoon with us. thank you, audience, for sending in some great questions. I apologize for not getting to everyone. It just happens when a lot of great questions come through at the exact same time. It's kind of like picking your baby. Which do you choose? But thank you so much for the engagement, and we greatly appreciate it. And once again, everyone have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.